G'day guys, full drive trip preparation for the Victorian High Country. What do I take and how do I go about it? Well, stick around because I'm about to show you. So we'll start in the back here. Now, before I drag sort of all my gear out, and I'll show you the gear that I bring away with me, whether it be for a weekend or if I'm going away for an extended trip, you know, for a week or whatever. There's maybe couple extra items there that I might bring away, you know, if I'm going away for a longer period. But this is pretty much, you know, how I pack the back of my patrol here, whether I'm going away on a trip. Now you're probably thinking, well, you know, there's not a lot of stuff in there if you're going away for a week or so, but you know what, but as I've said, you know, in a number of my videos, my camping is very simple. It's, you know, and it's very easy, and it's a simple setup. And everything that I take away, there's nothing that I don't use on sort of every single trip. So that's why I've got my packing down packed, and I know exactly, you know, what I need to take and how much I need to take. So that's sort of how I pack it all up. I just got an Oki strap there that just, you know, pinned back to the cargo barrier. Got my water jerry can in the back there, which, you know, I won't go into detail about how that sort of works because I've done a video and I'll put a link into that up above, and you can have a more detailed look at my jerry can setup if you like. But just in the back here, you know, in the drawer here, now that's all my recovery gear, but there's just a couple of extra items that I certainly bring along with me quite often. And now, you know, brake and clutch fluid, you just never know when, you know, you just might be needing that. It's only a small bottle, so it doesn't take up a lot of room. Now this one here, you're probably thinking, you know, the diesel additive that goes into, you know, my fuel during winter. I carry a bottle of this with me all the time, and you just never know when, you know, you just might come handy, particularly if you're camping up at elevation. You know, it's not always the white stuff that falls out of the sky, as I've mentioned before, that causes diesel motors to have an issue. It's just super cold temperatures. So if you're camping at elevation and, you know, you got a really crisp, clear night where you're camping, well, you could very well wake up the next morning with a really heavy frost on the ground, and that can sometimes cause you problems. So I carry a bottle of that just in case. You just never know. And then with these things, particularly if you've got a patrol like mine, never leave home with one of these. Now, I've learnt the hard way when I did Cape York a number of years ago. This failed, the pulley went on it, and it brought my patrol to a screaming halt. So I now carry a full assembly. Now, you can just carry just the pulley if you want, but it's so much easier to carry the full idler pulley assembly and a spare belt as well, which is, you know, this is just a belt that I've, one of my old belts that I've taken off and just keep it as a spare. So make sure you got one of those, particularly if you got a junior patrol like mine, because if this pulley fails, you're going to come to a screaming halt very, very quickly. So that's sort of all the gear in there, and that's just all my recovery gear, which, you know, I'm not going to drag all that out because, again, I've made a video on that, and again, I'll put a link in that up the top there, which shows you, you know, the recovery gear that certainly I take. And then just in there, that's just, you know, my drawer that's got all my plates and knives and forks and all that sort of stuff. And then just down the side here, you know, I've got my axe and log splitter and axe, you know, sort of thrown in there. And that's pretty much the back of my rig all set up. Now, I've got a couple of items inside. I'll show you how I strap those down, and then I'll show you a few items up on the roof. So we'll go and check out the items I've got inside. Okay, so these few items that I keep in the back of my patrol here, you know, I've got my table there, which is, you know, it's just handy for case I want to, you know, set it up during lunchtime, whatever. And then in the back there, I've got my solar panel, which I'm going to drag all this out and I'll show you it all set up. But I just put this on the back seat here because then I've got the seat belt around it, so, you know, so it can't sort of move around. But I like to keep this stuff handy rather than put it up on the roof rack. And again, I'll explain why I keep it off the roof rack when I get up there. And then just down here, got a few other camping gear. Now this big heavy item here, that's got all my, you know, my cooking gear, which you've seen in a number of videos, and it's fairly heavy. So I keep that on the floor, keep that center of gravity down nice and low. And then just my camp chair just sits on the floor down there as well. So we'll jump up the top and I'll show you what's going on with the roof. Okay, so this is pretty much, you know, how I pack up my roof when I'm going away for a trip. Now, if I'm going away for a bit longer, I certainly put a bit more thought in, you know, really trying to balance everything up. And this is why I try and balance my weight up, particularly up here, because it's all so high. And big heavy items, you know, up on your roof, you want to try and balance that weight up within your vehicle. So this big box here, that's got my chainsaw and fuel and all that sort of stuff in there. There's a fair bit of weight in there. So I throw that on this side, you know, and then that sort of balances up because I've got the fridge and that sort of thing on that side, and particularly once that's loaded, it's a fair bit of weight in the fridge. Swag, well, not a great deal of weight in there, but just big and bulky, so that sits up in there, jams in there nicely. And then spare fuel over this side, so I've got 20 litres of diesel goes in that. Now, if I'm going away just for a weekend, I generally don't need to carry spare fuel in mine because my patrol's got 120 litres from standard, so there's a fair bit of fuel in that for a weekend. But if I'm heading away for, 5, 6, 7 days or longer, I'd take an extra jerry can of fuel just as that backup, just in case you might need it. Now, there's a fair bit of weight in that, so that sort of balances the vehicle up, and it's what you sort of want to try and do with your heavy items. Just balance your vehicle up, because there's a lot of steep country and side angles in the Victorian High Country, and balancing your weight up certainly helps. And then, as I mentioned before, that area at the front there, that's why I don't put my table or my solar panel in there, because I like to keep that area open. When I'm getting close to camp, well, that gives me a nice open area on the roof rack there to put some wood in there for for the campfire of that night. And then just got my treads, they're just nicely bolted down over there, shovel, and that's pretty much the roof, how I sort of carry it around all the time. And so I'll get camp set up, get all this gear out. We'll go into a lot more detail, and certainly I'll go into how I'll go about planning, particularly those longer trips. So let's check that out. So this is pretty much my setup. So if I'm going away, for extended period of time, and I'm going to base camp up for 2 or 3 days, well, I'll always bring that extra extension sheet. It just gives me a stack more room. Swag goes out there. Plenty of room inside here for setting up your kitchen tables and camp chairs and whatever else, whether it be if it's raining, whatever else. I've got plenty of room under there. So this is a great setup. But as I say, I really only set this up if I'm going to be base camping up for a few days. And this is my home away from home. Now we'll come over here and I'll show you. I've got all the gear out now that I've shown you around the vehicle, how I've sort of packed it. I've now unpacked it, so I'll give you a bit of a rundown and we'll have a look at that. Okay, so this is just a few of the extra items that I certainly bring away with me. Look, even for a weekend they still come away, but the longer trips, all this gear all comes with me, and you're probably thinking there's not a lot of stuff here, but at the end of the day, as I've said, I just go away pretty much on my own in there, so I don't need a lot of stuff, and I've got my camping and packing gear right down to a fine art, and I only take what I really need. Now, so this is something I've had this for years. This is just a stainless steel bucket. This is a ripper bucket, this. I'll use this around the fire, to boil some water. If you want to do some dishes, it's certainly handy for putting your campfire out when it's time to go home. But that bucket there would be the best part of probably about 15-year-old. There was actually one used it when I was a bricklaying. So that's how long I've had it. And this is one thing I sort of forget to mention before, is around the back. Now, this is my nozzle here that goes onto my jerry can when I've got to top up my fuel tank. Because if you haven't got one of these, if you've got that sort of style jerry can, well, you haven't got a funnel of some sort, to try and go from that jerry can straight into the filler, you're pretty much going to lose nearly the whole jerry can. So this is an attachment that I've got here, just sits on top of the jerry can. And then all I did, I put an extension tube on it, just to make it a bit more length to go right inside the filler tube there. And that's how I empty my jerry cans. And then the other item here, look, I carry this pretty much with me all the time too. It doesn't take up a lot of room, but this is a water blind in case you've, you come across a deep river crossing or something like that. Strap that onto the front of the patrol, and I carry that pretty much all year round. You just never know, even during summertime, we can still get a lot of rain down here in big flash storms, and you just never know. Something like this might help you get out from where you're camping. And then down here, well, the solar panel. Now this is certainly a big bulky item, certainly better technology with solar panels these days, but if I'm going away again, if I'm going to base camp up for a few days, particularly over those warmer summer months, you're crazy if you haven't got some sort of a solar panel of some sort to keep your batteries charged up, whether, to keep your fridge running and whatever else, or if you've got a camper trailer, to keep that charged up. So definitely get yourself a solar panel over those summer months. And then back there, the old Dry-as-a-Bone raincoat. Well, again, that never goes anywhere without me. That travels with me all year round, because again, you just never know what's going to happen down here. And I'm going to keep drumming this in, the safety items. Now, again, this PLB feed income, everyone should get yourself one of these. It might save your life one day, or someone else's with you. So please, everyone, jump on one of these feed income. If you get lost, well, you're going to be guaranteed to be found very, very quickly, or if you're in an accident or emergency situation, one of these is going to help you out very, very quickly. So get yourself one of those. And again, the spider bite and snake bite first aid kit. That again, it's only small and light, so that's that one there. Again, I've showed you a number of times, but get yourself a good first aid kit. And then my camp cooking gear, that comes with me every time too, and I do all my cooking up on that. So that's pretty much my layout. That's everything that you've seen inside the back seat there and inside the back, apart from a water jerry can, which is still in there. That's my camp setup, and in the big drawer there, you got my knives and plates and forks and that sort of stuff, and cups, and all my food when I go food shopping all goes in that big drawer. But that's pretty much my setup. So we'll get into the last bit, the exciting bit about when you go camping. That's planning a trip and what I look for and how I go about planning, particularly a longer trip. So we'll have a look at that. Righto, so now we're into the exciting part of a trip, and that's the planning stage. Now, with my gear also, I get my gear out, particularly on a long trip, 4, 5, 6, 7 days and beyond, and I'll lay it all out on the floor inside my shed there behind the patrol, a good sort of 2, 3, 4 days out, because I want to make sure it's all in good nick. And particularly gas bottles, if you're bringing gas along, make sure they're full. You want to get those full, nice and early before you go, and then pack up your vehicle and head off. Now, but there's one thing that I certainly monitor quite regularly and involve it into my planning, and that's the weather, because the weather down here can play a big part, and it's so unpredictable. Never ever take this place for granted when it comes to the weather, and always treat it with a great deal of respect. And the couple of apps that I monitor when the weather, which goes involved with my trip planning, and firstly it's Weather Zone and Vic Emergency app. Now I won't go into a lot of detail about those two apps now, but I'll put a link up above, and you can drop in, have a look at that video there, and that goes into a lot more detail about those apps and how they work and what I sort of do with them. So check that one out. But Weather Zone, I monitor that one purely only for rain, really, rain and that sort of stuff. But I'll start looking at that on if I'm going to do a longer trip, sort of about 3 weeks out, because I want to know in the weeks leading up whether there's been any storms, have any heavy rain, and then that gives you a bit of indication on what the river systems are going to do, because the high country is just full of river systems and they rise very, very quickly with rainfall. So I'll monitor that, and then maybe in the week leading in, I'd sort of drop in maybe every day, every second day, just to see what's going on again with the weather and rain. And if there's been any rain sort of in that week leading in, or even the week back, I'd get onto Parks Victoria offices in those areas where you're planning to run your trip. I've always found these guys really, really helpful to give me the information that I'm looking for, particularly with river heights and what's going on with there. Look, these guys are on the ground all the time, so they're all over of what's going on out there. So well worth having a chat with those guys. And then the other one that I look at is the Vic Emergency app. Now, I've got the whole high country covered with that app, as you'll see in that other video. And the big notifications that I want from that one is the fires, particularly over this time of year during the summer. You want to know what's going on with bushfires. Now, with the Vic Emergency app, depends on what disasters you have got ticked off and what you want information on, you'll get an instant notification when one of those goes off. So say there's a fire starts, well, I get an instant notification on that fire, and that way then you can monitor it, you can you can see how bad it is and that sort of thing. Because if the fires start down here, well, the areas where you want to go into, there's a fair chance they're going to be shut for days and weeks and months after the fire. So you might need to, really reconfigure your trip plan when it comes to bushfires and even sometimes heavy rain. So check out those couple of apps there, get them on your phone, and start monitoring the weather, coming into your trip. And then the other one, the exciting part, is getting the maps out. Now, here's the whole Mighty Vic High Country, all bagged up here, and but luckily enough I sort of know the area pretty well, and generally don't have to pull a map out too often in the places I go into. But look, these are all rooftop maps, and I've found, and I've got them all laminated too, so which is a good thing with laminated maps. And I roll them up, don't ever fold them, you keep them all rolled up and they stay in good nick, and then they'll last you a lifetime. But these are rooftop maps, and the thing I like about with rooftop maps, they are extremely detailed. They'll give you contour lines too, to tell you how steep certain areas are, if you know how to read a map with contour lines. So generally with the contour lines, if they're getting really close together and those areas are getting really brown, dark brown in those contour lines, well, that's a good indication that those tracks or the areas you're going into is quite steep country. But if they're quite spread out, well, it's generally fairly flattish. So that's certainly well worth having a look at those. Check out the contour lines. But they also give you a lot of track information, sites to see what's going on, in the areas where you want to go. But when you're laying a map out, you're planning your trip out with all your mates, and you've got all your maps laid out and where you want to go, and that's the exciting part. But you just don't want to say, yeah, we'll follow this little track along here, and yeah, that looks like a good spot, we'll camp. We'll just completely wing it and go blind. But you really want to get as much information, particularly if they're areas where you've not been into before. Gain as much information as you can. You know, some good social media sites, and as I've already mentioned, you know, the Parks Vic guys are great for information, and there's a few other people out there and locals, whatever. So gain as much information as you possibly can if you're coming down here for the first time, because, you know, as I've said before, don't ever take this place for granted. You know, it can be a dangerous place if you don't know where you're going and you're just going to wing it and go from one side to the other. So really plan out those trips, and that way you're going to get through. You're going to have a safe trip, you're going to have a cracking time, and you'll look forward to coming back, you know, next time. So there you go, guys. Fair chance. I'll see you out in the bush someday.